Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound, and we're here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. We got a biographical episode today. We're going to look at the life of Eddie Rickenbacker, ace of aces, automotive and aviation pioneer. A while back, we did an episode on the most interesting man in the 19th century, Lew Wallace. Eddie's in the running for the most interesting man of the 20th century. So remember, like and subscribe. The subscriptions are especially important to the growth of our channel. Hit those buttons right now, and here we go. Before we get started, let me give you just a taste of what's to come. He's born into poverty in the American Midwest. He educates himself. He becomes an automotive engineer by the age of 18. He's in management of a major corporation by the age of 20. He then becomes one of America's most popular race car drivers in the pre-war era, and then America's ace of aces in World War I. Between the two wars, he becomes a dominant player in both the automotive and aviation industries. He founds his own automobile company and ends up running one of the largest airlines in America. Along the way, there are crashes, near-death experiences. He even becomes a popular cartoonist. There's a lot to this man's life, so let's go and have a look at it. Eddie's born in 1890, one of 8 kids in Columbus, Ohio. He's born into a house with no running water, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. His father's a construction, he's working in construction. He can provide for the family. He built him a nice home, as described. But in 1904, when Eddie's 14 years old, his father is beaten to death. Now, in the materials and throughout Eddie's life, he always said that his father died in an accident, but it was no accident. According to the Telegraph, Saturday, August 27, 1904, assault proves fatal. Columbus, Ohio, August 27th, William Rickenbacker, and it was Wilhelm, who was assaulted by William Gaines on July 18th, died in St. Francis Hospital yesterday of his injuries. A charge of murder has been placed against Gaines. Rickenbacker was struck over the head with a club. The gentleman was convicted of manslaughter and sent to prison. But that put Eddie in a really precarious situation. There's no income coming in. His mother takes in washing for the only source of income. So he drops out of school at grade 7. Now, this tells you all you need to know about the value of a college education. Keep that in mind throughout the story. Eddie's got a grade 7 education. Now, he takes a correspondence course in automotive engineering, which is actually productive, and he's hired by the Oscar Lear Automotive Company. So he's assisting in the engineering department there. The chief engineer, however, was involved in automobile racing, and he took Eddie along to the Vanderbilt Cup in 1906. In those days, if you look at race cars, pictures of race cars during the races, there's always 2 people in the car. There's a driver, and then there's an engineer. He's in charge of things like if it's off-road, it's keeping the maps or fixing the car if it breaks. And he takes Eddie along in that capacity. They don't win anything in the Vanderbilt Cup, but it opens Eddie's eyes to the prospect of automobile racing. Now, shortly after the race, he's taken aboard by Harvey Firestone, a billionaire tire manufacturer, and by 20 years old, he's actually running a small division of the Firestone Corporation. He's doing so well. He's 20 years old. He's got a grade 7 education, and he's signed to a contract at $6,000 a year. $6,000 is $180,000. Now, how many of you out there were making the equivalent of $180,000 when you were 20 years old, whether you had a grade 7 education or not? Now, as part of his job duties, he gets involved in automobile racing, and here we have the first time his name is mentioned in association with that. Lincoln Journal-Star, Lincoln, Nebraska, October 4th, 1910. Glory mixed with dust in Omaha auto races. The second Omaha auto race meet on the new speedway was finished yesterday in a blaze of glory and likewise a cloud of dust. Once again, the Firestone Columbus racer, driven by the placid, persevering, and daredevil Eddie Rickenbacker, was the thrill of the day. So he's a successful, winning automobile racer there at the age of 22. Here we have the Omaha Daily Bee, Monday, May 20th, 1912. Along with a picture of Eddie, it says Eddie Rickenbacker, an Omaha boy, and he's not an Omaha boy in that he's running for the Firestone division in Omaha, Nebraska, will drive a 90 horsepower Firestone Columbus machine in the 500-mile international sweepstakes at Indianapolis on Decoration Day. Now, it's Decoration Day. This is before World War II. We don't get. Well, anyways, it's we don't get Memorial Days, and it's Decoration Day in 1912. In any event, he says here he's lived in Omaha for several years and is the manager of the Firestone Columbus branch in Omaha. Remember, he's 22 years old. Now, he continues racing in August 15th, 1913's edition of the Lake County Independent. It says Rickenbacker gets honors. Eddie Rickenbacker of the Mason team was the chief breadwinner at the races. He won 2 events. It was an all-day racing event where they had up to 10 races on short tracks, and he won 2 of them and finished well in the others. He was the winner for the day. Now, what's interesting here, he's driving a Mason. Now, if we remember back to our Duesenberg edition, the Mason Automobile Company was run by Freddie and August Duesenberg, and they had Duesenberg engines in there. So he's running for Mason, but driving a Duesenberg-powered machine. In February of 1914, however, something happens which changes his life forever. Remember, Europe is about to be thrust into war. The World War is going to come in the summer, but in February 28th, this appears as a joke, basically, in the Los Angeles Times. It says, the Mason, which went wrong for Dave Lewis at the start of the Vanderbilt engagement, was back on the ring yesterday and is to cruise in the grand prize today under the guiding hand of Baron von Rickenbacker. When the war begins in August of 1914, the British authorities, somebody there provides him a copy of this newspaper, because when he goes there in the summer, when he goes to England in the summer to talk to the guys at the Sunbeam Automotive Company to become their featured racer in the American circuits, he's detained at the border by the police and is followed for the 6 weeks that he's in the UK, all because they think he may be a German spy or something of that type. That causes Eddie to anglicize his name, and he turns the B-A-C-H-E-R, Bacher, into B-A-C-K-E-R, Backer. So Johann Sebastian Bach and Eddie now Rickenbacker. So for the rest of the story, he's going to be Eddie Rickenbacker. Previously, he was Rickenbacker. It's just as an aside, the Rickenbackers who became the Rickenbackers of the Rickenbacker Guitar Company did the exact same thing. They're actually Adolf Rickenbacker was actually a second cousin of Eddie, and they also anglicized their names. Now, on July 5th, 1914, it's noted foreign car wins classic. Eddie Rickenbacker first win in wild fight. Traveling at the rate of 78 miles an hour, Eddie Rickenbacker drove his car to victory in the 300-mile automobile race here this afternoon, capturing $10,000 of the $25,000 prize money. So he wins. Think about how successful this man's life is right now. He's working for the Firestone Company, making at least $180,000 a year. He wins this race, which has a purse of, in today's dollars, $300,000. Things are going great for Eddie Rickenbacker. And there's a lovely photograph in the Los Angeles Times on November 17th, 1914, with the heading, Eddie Rickenbacker, driver of a Peugeot in the Corona race, but the smile on his face tells it all. This is a successful young man. But something happens, and that something is World War I, and America gets involved in World War I on April 6, 1917. They declare war. The first troops land in France on June 26, 1917, and the first engagement is October 23, 1917. So things are happening, and Eddie, being a patriotic young man, enlists. And in the article in the New York Sun of December 9, 1917, it says, Rickenbacker, now an aviator. Eddie Rickenbacker, the famous race driver who went to France some time ago to drive for General Pershing, found the life too quiet. He secured a transfer to the aviation section and is now learning how to fly. So he goes to France and becomes General Pershing's personal driver. I guess Pershing wanted to drive around France at 100 miles an hour. But Eddie wanted some more action. Now he's going to learn to become a pilot. Let's see if he becomes successful. Now, the New York Herald, Monday, May 20th, 1918. Now remember, the war's only going to run till November of 1918, so he's got to get us all his action in from this May 20th through to November. Headline, pretty good. Rickenbacker cuts off tail of enemy craft while 5,000 meters high. Pershing's official communique given out by the War Department tells of repulsing enemy raids yesterday and gives details of sensational air fighting, which Lieutenant Rickenbacker, formerly General Pershing's chauffeur, again carried off the honors. It says here, last evening, north of Toul, Lieutenant Rickenbacker, flying at 5,000 meters, that's 16,000 feet, was pursuing an Albatross-type plane when a second machine came between them. Lieutenant Rickenbacker struck the tail off the second machine, taking it off and apparently forcing the hostile plane down and out of control. Although his own machine was badly damaged, he succeeded in returning safely to his own lines. It's around this time he gets the nickname of the man who always returns. There's an interesting article in the New York Herald on June 16, 1918, noting that a lot of American sports stars had enlisted, and Christy Mathewson, a lot of guys had enlisted, and it was telling what they're doing now. Headline is, sports stars now shine over there. That's a popular thing, over the song Over There. Anyways, it says here, Lieutenant Eddie Rickenbacker, famous auto speedster who went over to France to drive General Pershing's automobile, but quickly got himself assigned to the more exciting and dangerous game of aviation, still soars among the American eagles that are daily bringing down the German vultures. Scarcely a week passes that one does not hear of some new aerial triumph by the 300-mile Speedway record holder and the winner of the Sheepshead Bay Auto Classic. It's noted Eddie's wonderful nerve The wonderful nerve in crisis Eddie showed on the automobile course in America has stood him in good stand in the air game. No more daring and cool a driver ever sat in the steering wheel of a racing automobile than Eddie Rickenbacker. Now they go on for the next 3 months. He's in the paper constantly. He's in the paper. They're covering this like they'd be covering Major League Baseball. It's as if they're August in the heat of a pennant race, and the public is particularly enamored of aviation aces. Aces is someone who shot down at least 5 planes. Now it says here in the New York Herald on June 16th that Eddie is showing the same nerve in the air over there that he used on the tracks in America. Not so long ago, he was attacked by 3 Bosch planes. Now, B-O-C-H-E is Bosch, and it's a derogatory term for Germans. 3 Bosch planes, apparently believing the best defense is a strong attack. Eddie drove his machine full tilt into one of them. That was at a height of 16,500 feet. Both planes fell. The German crashed to the earth, a shapeless heap. Rickenbacker fell 3,000 feet, regained control, and then calmly scooted home for repairs. Goes on further to say that Rickenbacker's greatest exploit was performed in June 1. Flying alone, Eddie met and attacked 5 Bosches, 2 Albatross planes, and 3 monoplanes. After he brought down one, the others decided discretion was the better part of valor and took off. The New York Herald on June 23rd, 1918 lists Rickenbacker's record. And it talks about him bringing down planes, German airplanes in enemy territory, downing a German biplane, and it recounts the 7 or 8 flights, the 7 or 8 attacks that he had executed over the past 3 weeks, and notes that his numbers, he's now up to, I believe, 10 at this point in time in victories. Now, the New York Times, this may take a little explaining. The New York Times has a wonderful picture here of Eddie standing next to the wing of his plane. Oh, we should be on the screen right now. He's holding the wing, and he said the wing was knocked off during aerial combat, and he managed to get back to the base without it. Now, you may be wondering how he got home with his wing knocked off, but remember, he's flying biplanes which have 4 wings. So if you lose one, you can still theoretically fly. He did, and somehow made it back home on only 3 wings. In the New York Herald of August 4th, 1918, there's a wonderful photograph of Eddie along with his airplane. He's part of the 94th Hat in the Ring Squadron, and this article, the accompanying article, notes that he's been cited for bravery. It's the first of many citations that he's going to be awarded, and we'll summarize those at the end. Now, it's now October 12th. He only has a month left in the war. Headline, American down 6 planes. Rickenbacker adds 2 more to his string, making 15 in all. It says here, Lieutenant Edward Rickenbacker of Columbus, Ohio, got 2, bringing his official total to 15, with 3 more, which will probably be confirmed soon. And then on October 29th, 1918, in the New York Herald, Rickenbacker downs 2. American aviator's record, now 22 enemy planes. You know what's funny about this? He'll end up with 26. When you look down the detailed list, 4 of the vehicles that he shot down were blimps. I'm not sure whether you should get full credit for a blimp, but maybe you should get half credit, which would make his total 24. But anyways, he's credited with 26. And on November 5th, 1918, they summarize the awards that he'd won. It says that for the following act of extraordinary heroism, the Bronze Oak Leaf is awarded to be worn on the Distinguished Service Cross that had been previously awarded on October 18th. And in describing what happened, he says he encountered 6 enemy planes which were in the act of attacking 4 Spads, which were below them. Undeterred by their superior numbers, he unhesitatingly attacked them and succeeded in shooting down in flames and completely breaking the formation of the others. So he will go on to be awarded a 4 Distinguished Service Cross as well as the Congressional Medal of Honor. Well, don't get any better than that. He's also awarded France's highest honors, the Croix de Guerre with Palms in May of 1918 and the Legion of Honor Award in May of 1918. So he's as well decorated as one could be coming out of the First World War. Now things are a little slow when the war ends on November 11th, 1918. So what do you do to keep the folks at home happy who want more action from France? Well, here's what you do. New York Times, November 25th, 1918. Air battle staged for motion pictures. Rickenbacker in sham fight with real German planes over American lines. They may basically start making a movie out of, down their spare time. And here's what happens. Where the byline is with the American aerial forces in France. An air battle between a big German biplane and a little French Spad with Lieutenant Edward Rickenbacker, an American ace in the French machine, was staged over an American aerodrome the other day for the benefit of Army photographers. So let's take some film, let's recreate some stuff, let's keep the people in the home front happy. Now, Eddie does come home, and he's back home by January of 1919. Now, what should a guy do who's been a successful race car driver, and now he's a war hero? He's on the lecture circuit, the banquet circuit. He can obviously get a cushy job with just about any defense or automotive company out there. His name is a household word. He could endorse products. He could do all kinds of things that would lead to a life of leisure. But that's not what Eddie Rickenbacker does. Here we go. August 14th, 1921. Rickenbacker, now auto builder. World famous aviator, now connected with new automobile concern. Announcement of the formation of the $5 million. No, he didn't have $5 million, so it came from somewhere. Rickenbacker Motor Company has been the sole topic of conversation in the hub of motordom ever since it was made public early last week. So he's going to try to design and sell and build his own automobile. And he does. He takes a serious shot at running an automobile company. In the meantime, though, he never loses his love of aviation, even when it almost kills him. Here we go. New York Herald, Friday, May 27th, 1921. Rickenbacker near death in a crash. Plane smashed in landing at Cheyenne in California. California to Washington flight. May give up flying. It says here that Captain Rickenbacker narrowly escaped death when he smashed his plane in landing here tonight. The plane came in, hit like they often do. If you remember the old newsreel stuff, the nose dug in, the plane flipped on its back. There were like 1,000 people at the airport waiting for him to show up. That's how much of a celebrity he is. They rush to his aid. He pops up and he says, "Don't worry, it's nothing. It's nothing. I'm fine." And he actually ends up repairing the plane and going on with the flight. Well, he survived, but does his company survive? Here we go. Rickenbacker car featured at Auto Show. San Francisco Examiner, February 14th, 1922. Headline over the automobile picture is an ace of an automobile, and it actually was, by all accounts, a very fine automobile. It was one of the first to have brakes on all four wheels. It was advanced in basically every aspect of design. But he was facing a numbers problem. And the numbers problem was this. In 1920, there were as many as 93 functioning automobile manufacturers in the United States. By 1935, that's whittled down to about 12. You had to be incredibly good and incredibly lucky and have deep pockets to survive that entire shakeout period when the American automobile industry sort of got into the shape that it remains in today. And he was just on the wrong side of the numbers. By 1927, the company was losing money hand over fist, and it declares bankruptcy and leaves him with $250,000 in debt, which is about $7.5 million today. But that doesn't keep him down, because he can always fly. And here's an article on the New York Herald: 15,000 miles by air, Rickenbacker plan, longest flight ever tried in U.S. to cover 64 cities in business surveys. He went basically to the 64 largest cities in America, flew from one to another, and was basically taking a business survey. He was looking at the industrial capacity and what kind of aviation aerodromes they had. What was the future of industry going to be like? So he gathered a lot of information, but not much that was very specific to help him save his automobile manufacturer. So Eddie Rickenbacker was a polymath. He was involved in many things his entire life, as we're seeing right now. He begins his involvement with Airlines in 1926. Headline of the Vero Beach Journal, June 3rd and 26. Captain Rickenbacker will visit Florida ports soon. Captain Eddie V. Rickenbacker, and the V is funny, he just made that up. He doesn't have a middle name, but he's been using V for a while here, and so he's Eddie V. Rickenbacker. Premier American flying ace will be a visitor to this city early this month. It was announced today by a representative of the Florida Airway Corporation. Rickenbacker is a large stockholder, and while he's in Florida, he plans to visit 4 cities and check out their feasibility with respect to airline development. Now, in the Tampa Times of June 21, 1926, it's noted that Rickenbacker is due tomorrow. War Ace will be guest here on Tuesday. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, America's premier war ace, will arrive in Tampa tomorrow from Palm Beach to be the guest of Major Reed M. Chambers. The noted airman with Mr. Chambers will leave Thursday for Havana. There they will negotiate with the Cuban government relative to the establishment of a line of triple-motor airplanes in a service between Tampa and Havana, it is said. Captain Rickenbacker is financially interested in Florida and is an enthusiastic exponent of commercial aviation, as of course he is. I wonder if that's how they got all those Cuban cigar rollers into Havana. I doubt that they came on his tri-motor planes. Now, what's next for Eddie? He's got an automobile company. It's tinkering on bankruptcy, but it's on the edge of bankruptcy. He's trying to run an airline. He does the only logical thing that a next race car driver would do. He buys the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And the numbers are like $700,000 is what we hear. Headline, November 20th, 1927, the Indianapolis Star, Rickenbacker plans Speedway changes. would build golf course inside Oval and lease track for tests. He's looking for other ways to make money off his new asset. It doesn't make a lot of sense to just have a facility of that size only earning you money one day a year. So he thinks, let's put a golf course, and he does. And that golf course has been remodeled several times. It's still in existence, and as far as I know, it's a popular, profitable venture. He also gets involved with radio. He says there's indication the next year's race would be broadcast. He said in a statement, the Speedway is now negotiating with the National Broadcasting Company, with NBC, to broadcast it. So they're going to make the Indianapolis 500 a spectacular nationwide event, and he does that. He's so good at running the Speedway that the local inhabitants of Indianapolis become concerned he may try to move the whole enterprise. Indianapolis Star, November 20th, 1927. Speedway to remain here. Reports of removal to Detroit are absurd, says Rickenbacker. They were worried because all of his financial ties and his automotive ties are all in Detroit, and they were worried not that he was going to physically move the operation, but that he would take the race there to a newly built facility in Detroit. But of course, that never happened. Now, we're now at about 1927, 1928. He's got his fingers in a million pies. It gets even more complicated, and I'm not going to go through everything because it'd be crazy. We need chalkboards and Rolodexes. But we're going to sort of summarize what happened in the 7-year period from 1928 to 1935. In 1928, he begins his relationship with General Motors by taking a job with Cadillac. He then, along with General Motors, they buy Allison Engines. Now, Allison Engines is an airline. It's an airplane engine manufacturer. If you remember the P-40 Tomahawks that they used in World War II, those were Allison engines. And the Allison engines were used in a variety of planes. It's an 1,100 horsepower motor, and it was used in a variety of planes in World War II. He convinces GM to buy the Fokker airplane manufacturing company, like Fokker triplanes and stuff like that. He convinces them to buy that. He takes a position with American Air Transit. So he takes, along with his Florida connection, now he's got a stake in American Air Transit. In 1935, he merges Eastern Air Transit with the Florida airline he has to form Eastern Airlines. And Eastern Airlines, he would take it from a small regional airline to basically a juggernaut. By the late 1960s, they're one of the 3 or 4 largest airlines in America. They control all of the traffic basically in the eastern part of the United States, from New York down to Miami. And if you went to Disney World back in the day, if you went to Miami Beach back in the 60s, you flew Eastern Airlines. As a matter of fact, my first experience in an airplane in 1969 was going to Miami from Detroit, and of course it was on Eastern Airlines. Now talk about a sidetrack. Like, he doesn't have enough stuff that he's doing here. In 1935, he becomes a cartoonist. Now he's always been an artistic guy, and as a youth he enjoyed drawing, but he's not a professional. So he hires a pro to draw the cartoon, but he writes it. So he's responsible for if it was a musical on Broadway, he's responsible for the book. And here's the Indianapolis Star from March 15, 1935. In the Sunday Star's new 24-page comic tabloid section, beginning Sunday, March 17th, Up to the Heights, thrilling air adventure with Captain Eddie Rickenbacker's new adventure page, Ace Drummond, daring young aviator, created by the famous American. He runs that cartoon series for about 5 years, and it eventually is in as many as 135 newspapers. Now, so here he is. He's a cartoonist running the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, who's also the president and chairman of Eastern Airlines. So what happens to him? He's in a terrible airline crash on February 27, 1941. Here we have the Indianapolis Star of February 28, 1941. Headline, blood cells are rushed to Rickenbacker. Airliner crash victim, 7 killed, 9 injured. It'll end up being 8 killed, 8 injured. Tell the fellows I'm all right, messages the Speedway head. But the ominous headline also, airman has even chance, member of Congress is among the dead, and a congressman did die in the crash. What happened was the plane was going from Washington to Atlanta, and they said the altimeter should have been set for 900 feet, which is what the elevation is of the Atlanta airport. They had it set at sea level. So when they were coming in the dark into Atlanta, they thought they were at 1,000 feet, but they were actually at 100 feet above ground. And their airplane clipped a few tall pine trees and went down in a grove of trees, killing 8. And they didn't. No rescuers got there till the next morning. Those that were alive stayed huddled together as best they could in the airframe until help arrived in the morning. And what were Eddie's injuries? Well, these are this is non-professional diagnosis here. What we got is says here, they said in the paper, dented skull, fractured left elbow, several fractured ribs, crushed hip, fractured pelvis, broken tibia, and crazily, his left eyeball heading from the socket. He recovered, took a months of rehabilitation, but he eventually was able to return to his jobs and to flying. It resulted, the airline investigation, the crash investigation resulted in their having now, or immediately thereafter, being 2 altimeters, one set at sea level in the plane and one set at your destination. So you didn't make stupid mistakes like this causing the deaths of 8 people. Now, that's only the second. Well, it's most interesting. The war starts, of course, in December 1941. He being a good citizen, wants to help. He's a little old to be a fighter. He can't be a fighter pilot anymore. But the Secretary of War Stimson appoints him sort of as a special investigator and says, go to the Pacific and see what the men need, see what we should be providing them, make recommendations. So he goes out there on a B-17, leaving out Hawaii, heading for Australia, and he's on the plane with 10 other fellows. Well, the pilot does an Amelia Earhart in that he misses one of the islands that he's supposed to land on to refuel, flies by it, and they eventually run out of fuel and crash. And the newspaper articles at the time mentioned that Eddie was working the radio, and he radios back to base that they're lost, that they don't have the bearing of where they're at, and that they only have enough fuel left for about an hour of flying, and that's the last they hear of him. He goes down, and they don't hear about Eddie. There's no word from him. They search, they don't, but they're hundreds of miles off from where they think he is. They search and they don't find him. What happens is there's a series of, when the plane goes down, it's a B-17, large plane goes down, it lands, and gives them some time to get out, and they get out and they get onto rafts. There's several rafts. They become separated. One raft actually finds land and sort of like a Gilligan's Island thing. They're there. The rest are just floating around. A couple of the fellows die. One fellow drinks seawater and then expires a day or so later. He's buried at sea. But a plane by accident finds one man's raft, the pilots, and then they intensify. They actually find everybody. And Eddie Rickenbacker had been floating around in a rubber raft for 23 days. He's kept alive. They just had a few, the equivalent of granola bars. They had a day's worth when they get in the rafts. They're kept alive at around day 6 and 7. They capture a few seagulls, and they eat the raw seagull meat, but they also use some of the meat and fat as bait, and they catch some, they chum as they were, and they catch some smaller fish in the water. And that's what they live on. That's what they live on for 23 days until they're found. Headline of the Indianapolis Star, November 15th, 1942. The man who always comes back and companions are rescued off Samoa. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, the man who always comes back, has done it again, rescued by a big Navy Catalina flying boat after 3 perilous weeks adrift in a tiny rubber raft on the broad expanse of the South Pacific. And they had to get everybody in. The plane didn't have the capacity for everybody, so they rode back on the wing of the plane. Get a load of this. Indianapolis Star, November 18th. 42. Rickenbacker, tied to rescue plane, rides 40 miles with companion and wants to finish mission after rest. What it says here is Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, lost in the Southwest Pacific when his plane was forced down October 21 and rescued 3 weeks later, rode the wing of the rescue plane while it taxied 40 miles on the ocean surface to its base. The department announced that although Rickenbacker still needs at least 2 weeks in hospital to complete his recovery from the long exposure at sea, he already has expressed his desire to complete the mission for which he was sent. So he wants to get back in the action. So how many airplane crashes have you been in the last couple of years? Well, Eddie was in a whole series of them, and those 2 in the 1940s were pretty rough. Now, that's not all that Eddie did in the 1940s. He recovers from that. He recovers from that crash, and he goes on another special assignment. The Americans and the British want him to go over and talk with the Soviets, with the Russians, and see what they need. Because they're all in it together against Hitler. But you can't really get to Russia very easily from England or America. There's like the Nazis are like in the middle of it. So here's the route that he took. He flies from Washington to the Azores to Cairo, Cairo to India, India to Burma, over the hump into China, from there to Iran, and then in the back door to the USSR. He spends several weeks in the USSR talking with officials, trying to get information from them, all the while they're trying to get information from him, spy versus spy kind of thing. When he leaves Russia, he goes and visits with Churchill and is debriefed by Churchill on all aspects of what was going on, and he files a complete report to Roosevelt. And for this, he wins the Medal for Merit from the U.S. President. The Medal for Merit at the time could be given by the American government. Now, after the war, things calmed down a little. He's not actively flying much anymore, and he's not doing anything dangerous. He's just running he's running Eastern Airlines incredibly well. It becomes, like I said, it's a juggernaut. It's a big, big airline. But the problem with big airlines in the late 1960s, as TWA and Pan Am will come to find out, is that it's hard to stay in business, and Eastern Airlines eventually folds. That's long after Eddie's left. Eddie, though, does write his autobiography. There's a nice article in the Indianapolis Star on November 12th, 1967. Captain Eddie's life, stranger than fiction. Ain't it? It pretty much is. It says here, 19th century author Horatio Alger never knew Edward Vernon Rickenbacker. If he had, he would have had to look no further for a central figure for his stories. In the book Rickenbacker, the autobiography of Captain Eddie, he weaves a factual tale of rags to riches life, which virtually is without parallel in the history of America. Well, it is. General Lew Wallace is close, but these guys are really special. And then it goes through and it lists everything that he did, just as we've gone through here, and concludes that now 77 years old, Rickenbacker can look back on a life filled with enough people to make up a good-sized telephone book. And when the candles of life burn low, he can honestly say he's given it his best. And didn't he now? That's not just a life well lived, it's an important life. He did important things at important times and always seemed to be on the right side of whatever was going down. He was extremely fortunate in surviving his multiple crashes, but he had drive, stamina, determination, and most importantly, a grade 7 education. Now, if you'd lived a life like that, you might want to relax at the end of the day and maybe on a nice Saturday evening. And the only way to relax with Eddie Rickenbacker would be to have a cocktail, an Aviation cocktail. It's a classic. 2 ounces of gin, one half ounce of maraschino liqueur, 1/4 ounce of creme de violet. It's tough to get sometimes, but search it out. You got to use the creme de violet. 3/4 ounces of lemon juice, freshly squeezed, always freshly squeezed. And because we have lemon juice, it's not just purely spirits, we have to shake this one. So you add the gin, maraschino liquor, creme de violet, and lemon juice to a shaker filled with ice, and you shake it until it's well chilled. Then you strain it into a chilled cocktail glass and garnish with a brandied cherry, and you will enjoy the Aviation cocktail. Now that's it for today. Next week we'll be back with another fun episode. But I want you to remember to like and subscribe. The subscriptions are very important to move the channel along. So until we meet again, and good night, and well, see you down the road.